History holds many strange tales, but few are as macabre and remarkable as the posthumous execution of Oliver Cromwell. London is abuzz, not for a royal celebration or a public holiday, but for a most unusual spectacle: the hanging, drawing, and quartering of a man already dead for 2 years. This was no ordinary criminal, but Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector of England, Scotland, and Ireland, a man who had once held the very fate of the nation in his hands. How did such a bizarre event come to pass? Why dig up a dead man only to subject his remains to the most brutal punishment of the age? The answer, as with many things in history, lies in a tangled web of politics, religion, and personal vendetta. Oliver Cromwell, a figure of immense complexity, led Parliament's army to victory and signed King Charles III's death warrant. As Lord Protector, he transformed England into a republic, leaving an indelible mark on its history. Yet, his rule had critics, and the restored monarchy under Charles II sought revenge. Charles II aimed to avenge his father's execution and solidify his power. Thus, the stage was set for one of the most bizarre events in English history. Oliver Cromwell, born in 1599, seemed unlikely to achieve greatness. Raised in a modest home, his life was deeply influenced by Puritan faith. This religious fervor shaped his beliefs and political ideology. Cromwell's education at Huntingdon Grammar and Cambridge University sowed seeds of ambition. He married Elizabeth Bourchier and became a gentleman farmer and member of Parliament. England in the early 17th century was a nation simmering with religious and political tension. King Charles I, a staunch believer in the divine right of kings, clashed repeatedly with Parliament over matters of governance and religious freedom. The country was deeply divided between those who supported the king and those who championed the authority of Parliament. When civil war erupted in 1642, Cromwell, a devout Puritan and fervent opponent of the king's policies, joined the parliamentarian forces. He quickly proved himself to be a brilliant military strategist and an inspiring leader, earning the loyalty of his men, who were known as Ironsides for their discipline and tenacity. Cromwell's military genius was evident in a series of decisive victories against the royalist forces, including the battles of Marston Moor and Naseby. With the royalist forces crushed and King Charles I imprisoned, England found itself at a crossroads. The execution of the king in 1649 marked the end of the monarchy and the beginning of a bold experiment, the English Commonwealth. In the power vacuum left by the deposed king, Oliver Cromwell emerged as the most powerful figure in the land. Cromwell, initially reluctant to assume the mantle of leadership, eventually accepted the title of Lord Protector in 1653. His rule was marked by a combination of religious zeal, political astuteness, and military might. Despite his military triumphs and attempts at establishing a stable government, Cromwell's rule was marked by constant challenges and a deep sense of unease. The execution of the king had left a scar on the nation's psyche, and the specter of royalist rebellion loomed large. Cromwell, deeply distrustful of both his enemies and former allies, ruled with an iron fist, relying on a large standing army and a network of spies to maintain order. The Lord Protector's Puritan reforms, while welcomed by some, alienated many who resented the imposition of strict moral codes and the suppression of traditional forms of entertainment. When Cromwell died in 1658, he left behind a nation deeply divided, its future uncertain. The death of Oliver Cromwell in 1658 ushered in a period of uncertainty and political maneuvering. His son, Richard Cromwell, inherited the title of Lord Protector, but lacked the political acumen and military clout to hold on to power. The nation, weary of Puritan rule and yearning for stability, looked towards the exiled heir to the throne, Charles II. In 1660, after years of exile in France, Charles II returned to England, greeted by jubilant crowds, eager for the restoration of the monarchy. The ghosts of the Civil War cast a long shadow over the restored monarchy, and the specter of Oliver Cromwell continued to haunt the new regime. Charles II, though eager to project an image of reconciliation and stability, could not ignore the symbolic importance of addressing the legacy of Oliver Cromwell. The execution of his father, Charles I, remained a potent symbol of the monarchy's humiliation and vulnerability. In 1661, almost 2 years after Cromwell's death and burial at Westminster Abbey, Parliament passed a bill declaring the late Lord Protector a traitor. This posthumous declaration of guilt paved the way for an act of macabre vengeance, the exhumation and symbolic execution of Cromwell's remains. Some viewed it as an act of petty revenge, unbecoming of a king who preached forgiveness and unity. However, for Charles II and his supporters, it was a necessary act of symbolic retribution, a way to exorcise the ghosts of the past. The trial of Oliver Cromwell, or rather, the trial of his corpse, was a macabre spectacle that laid bare the political and religious tensions that continued to simmer beneath the surface of the restored monarchy. Cromwell's effigy, dressed in regal attire, was brought before a specially convened court and charged with high treason for his role in the execution of Charles I and the overthrow of the monarchy. Cromwell, unable to defend himself from beyond the grave, was found guilty in absentia and sentenced to the full measure of punishment reserved for traitors: hanging, drawing, and quartering. On January 30th, 1661, the anniversary of the execution of Charles II, the macabre spectacle of Oliver Cromwell's posthumous execution unfolded before a large and boisterous crowd at Tyburn. Cromwell's embalmed body, exhumed from its resting place in Westminster Abbey, was hanged in chains at Tyburn, exposed to the jeers and insults of the crowd. His severed head, impaled on a spike, was placed on public display outside Westminster Hall, a grim reminder of the fate that awaited those who dared to challenge the authority of the monarchy. The 30th of January, 1661, dawned crisp and cold over London. This was no ordinary day. It was a date etched in the collective memory of the nation, the anniversary of Charles I's execution. Word had spread like wildfire through the city and beyond. The Lord Protector, the man who had shattered the monarchy and held the reins of power for so long, was to be punished, even in death. The crowds began to gather before dawn, a motley throng of royalists eager to witness the fallen leader's humiliation, curious onlookers drawn by the sheer macabre spectacle, and even those who had supported Cromwell, now forced to bear witness to his downfall. The air crackled with a mixture of morbid fascination, hushed whispers, and the occasional drunken boast, all focused on the wooden platform that awaited its grim cargo. As the sun climbed higher, casting a pale light on the assembled throng, a procession made its way through the crowd towards the gallows. At its heart, a wooden coffin, draped in black, contained the embalmed remains of Oliver Cromwell, once the most powerful man in England, now reduced to a pawn in a macabre display of royal power. The coffin was hoisted onto the platform, the crowd falling silent as the sentence passed upon the deceased by the restored Parliament was read aloud. The coffin lid was opened, revealing not the preserved body of Cromwell, but an effigy crafted with chilling realism. The effigy was hanged from the gallows, left to swing there for hours, a grim spectacle for all to see. The crowd reacted with a mixture of emotions. Cheers erupted from the throats of staunch royalists, relishing in the symbolic revenge against the man who had toppled their king. Jeers and insults were hurled at the dangling effigy. Curses upon Cromwell and his memory, some punctuated by drunken laughter and calls for even greater indignities to be visited upon the deceased. Yet beneath the surface of this macabre celebration, a current of unease ran through the crowd. Many, even those who had chafed under Cromwell's rule, found themselves disturbed by the spectacle. The hanging effigy, a grotesque puppet swaying in the wind, seemed to mock not just Cromwell, but the very notion of justice, leaving a bitter taste in the mouths of even those who had come seeking retribution. As the day wore on, the crowds began to disperse, leaving behind the empty platform and the lingering stench of death. Cromwell's embalmed body, subjected to the symbolic punishment of hanging, drawing, and quartering, was then beheaded. Its final resting place, a humble, unmarked grave somewhere within the grounds of Tyburn. His head, however, was not afforded the anonymity of an unmarked burial. Impaled on a spike, it was displayed prominently atop Westminster Hall, a grim warning to any who dared to challenge the authority of the newly restored monarchy. The posthumous execution of Oliver Cromwell stands as a stark testament to the enduring power of symbolic acts. Charles II aimed to erase Cromwell's memory and reassert the Stuart dynasty's legitimacy. Yet the execution solidified Cromwell's controversial place in history. Exhuming and desecrating his remains showed the monarchy's deep-seated anxiety. Cromwell's legacy continued to cast a long shadow over the restored monarchy. Even in death, Cromwell remained a potent symbol of revolution and resistance. Over 3 centuries after his death, Oliver Cromwell remains one of the most complex figures in British history. He is both revered and reviled, hailed as a champion of liberty, and condemned as a ruthless dictator. His legacy is a tapestry woven from military genius, religious zeal, and political cunning. Cromwell's posthumous execution ironically contributed to his enduring fame. His name remains etched in public consciousness, a reminder of his profound impact on English history. The ghost of Oliver Cromwell haunts the corridors of power, a spectral presence refusing to be silenced. His posthumous execution amplified his voice, making him a martyr for some, a cautionary tale for others. Tyburn, once a place of dread, is now a quiet corner of London, marked by a plaque. The memory of jeering crowds and the dangling effigy, the unsettling knowledge of a dead man standing trial, all serve as a reminder of the complexities of power and the allure of revenge.